Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on We Had to Remove This Post by Hanna Bervoets. This is a very timely book. It is a book about the pervasive influence of social media on an individual's life. What happens to that person's mental state? What happens to that person's sense of identity, the relationships that individual has? And it takes an interesting tack. There's a way in which the book is a modern day metamorphosis. Kafka had given us a character in Gregor Samsa who, had this miserable job that he did not enjoy, and we saw that ultimately he became the misery of that job. Here we have a character who is experiencing something very similar. Kaylee has taken a job at a company that scrubs social media posts, that looks and screens them and identifies this can stay up or flags something for removal. That is something that many of us experience here on YouTube in a social media perspective. These posts are screened, videos are screened, comments can be screened. And so we have a character whose job is to be inundated with these types of posts, and not just, happy posts, exciting posts, but also to really get into what are the posts that could be removed, and what is the protocol that someone goes through. Bervoets sources the text at the end and identifies ways in which she's explored how these screening protocols work. Kaylee and her colleagues have discussions around, okay, this showed this much nudity, but it's okay for this reason, or this post talked about violence but didn't actually show any violence, or these are the different PC's protected categories, but you can, on the other hand, say this comment that seems much more inflammatory because, well, saying this word is not a protected category. And so she unravels how these screenings work, but we see what happens to Kaylee as she is spending hours and hours every day just making decisions, quick decisions. She talks about how quickly she has to look at a post or a video, see what's in it, and then make a choice. And then they go out on their lunch break or on their snack break, and all they can talk about is what they've seen. And we see what it's doing to Kaylee, what it's doing to her colleagues, what it does as she starts dating another character who works there at the same company, Hexa, Sigrid, what it does to their relationship. And that becomes very much the crux of the book, is how is Kaylee affected by what has happened. The book takes the form of an interview, a sort of discussion between Kaylee and someone who is doing some sort of like legal work, examining what did happen to everyone who was working at this company. And we realize, of course, that this is timely because there are people who are experiencing this, that there's someone who is having to screen videos and make the choice about what to remove or what to keep up. And what happens when they start to feel this collision between their own real lives and what they've been viewing. One of the most fascinating aspects of the book is when they are confronted with a situation that seems to be, if anyone took out their camera and recorded it, would that video be allowed to stay up? And how each of them react to it. Do they want to find out what happens at the end of this moment in their actual lives? Or do they want to try and stop it from happening? How does each of them react as individuals? And Kaylee, reflects on that. Bervoets allows us to see her sort of realizing the unraveling that is existing on this team and in her own life. But the way she does it, it's spooned out very carefully for us to build up and see how has she been brought to this point, and then where has she ended up as an individual and in those relationships. There are aspects of the writing that really do work, and then there are some aspects that I think perhaps as sort of an early work from Bervoets, or perhaps in translation, don't quite move through quite as fluidly. But as an example, 2 more years at the museum and I will have paid it all off. That is, if I work overtime during the holidays when the pay's better. So here's hoping I get shifts on Easter and Boxing Day too. Because no, there's no way I'm going to join in with this thing. Though I understand why my former colleagues have. There seems to be some lawsuit. She only took the job because it paid better than her previous job. I read that Robert sleeps with his taser these days, afraid that terrorists will come and kidnap him. The names in the newspaper article have been changed, but Timothy can only be Robert, I'm sure of that. That Natalie can't handle loud noises, bright lights, or sudden movement in her peripheral vision. There are a bunch of people who struggled with that, so I'm not sure who Natalie is. I know that many of my former colleagues flinch when someone comes up behind them in the supermarket, that they lie in bed until after dark and then stay up till it's light. too exhausted to start a new job. They see things day and night, the same things I don't like to talk about either. And I'm sorry to say that some of those symptoms aren't exactly foreign to me. And yes, just like many of my former colleagues, I left Hexa of my own accord. So again, I understand why you've come knocking on my door. But for you to understand why I won't be taking you up on your offer, there's something you need to know about me first. The images that keep me up at night, Mr. Siddiq, aren't the gruesome pictures of bleeding teenagers. And she goes on, she goes, no, what keeps me awake are images of Sigrid, my dearest former colleague. And she tells us that, and she gives a description of the specific image she has of she calls her closest former colleague. We learn later that they became romantic partners, that, you know, they were lovers. And the specific image she gives of Sigrid waits until the end of the book to explain why it is that image that is what keeps her up at night. And so as we see Kaylee, you know, I think there's a phrase in the book that Bervoets uses of secondary trauma, that's seeing all of this violence, seeing the most dehumanizing aspects of social media for hours on end, day after day after day, what that did to her as an individual, what it did, you know, to her human interactions. And the reflection that exists at the end when she's confronted with, you know, her own choices and her own actions, and the way that she reacts to it is to make a choice and sort of like classify why that video, you know, could stay up or could be removed. And so there's something metafictional about it. There's something that is deeply personal about the book that I think it's a brilliant idea. It's an important idea. It is something that we really need to consider. Certainly in previous generations, it was the idea of violence in television or movies, or violence in video games. The idea that before a certain time at night, certain things could not be shown. And then after a certain time at night, when children were expected to be in bed, television shows could be more for adults. And yet now the way that these ideas and these experiences that are very realistic and are far more authentic and extreme in their authenticity are available to so many just through the internet. So there are ways in which Bervoets really tapped into this, and I think she's definitely a writer I'll be looking forward to reading more from. Now, as I had mentioned, certainly Kafka's Metamorphosis, I really do feel like there are ways in which Bervoets was treating this as a modern day metamorphosis. Another work I was reminded of was But Crime Does Punish by Jan Johannides, primarily because of the way it takes the form of this character speaking in an interview to an unnamed narrator who is the reader, and how we are invited to sort of take the reader's perspective, but also take the perspective of the person who's interviewing this narrator and this character. I thought that was really interesting. This is just an outstanding Slovakian work. The way that the book has that visceral sense of what the 21st century feels like, psychologically, or what the way that women have been able to advance sort of their own voices, their own identities in the 21st century in new ways, reminds me a lot of what Ariana Harwitz does in Feeble Minded. I think this book is just absolutely outstanding. I'm hoping that Hanna Bervoets will continue to grow as a writer towards someone like Ariana Harwitz, who's just one of my favorite writers. There are ways in which the details and sort of the daily narration of activities reminds me a lot of what Colette was doing. Also the erotic aspects of the work and how they're completely unerotic. A couple of other works that I was reminded of, the writings of Raymond Carver, the way that he has characters who feel they're making desperate choices, they're at this sort of dead end in their lives, and they're aware of it. Kaylee and Sigrid and some of the others felt very aware of how deadened their lives felt, that they were trapped. They had to take this miserable job because it was the only way to pay off student loans, or the debt from, you know, a previous relationship and that was, you know, toxic, and that someone had been saddled with the debt for cars and a bunch of, you know, materials that were needed for a job that never even emerged. Lonelyhearts from Nathanael West, I think, would be another work where we have a character who is sort of destroyed by his job, and we see the sort of the violence and the depredations that occur there. An earlier work might be Players by Don DeLillo, which is definitely not one of DeLillo's best novels. It's probably in his bottom three. But if you are a fan of DeLillo and the way that he looks at sort of the paranoia of the late 20th century, I think that's something that Bervoets is looking at from this new medium in the digital age. And then the last would be probably the couple of the final novellas from Philip Roth, the Indignation or the Humbling, where we see someone grappling with real fears and fears about lives ending, fears about just how everything is changing and feels almost faded in some ways. So anyways, I'm curious to know if anybody else has read this work. And as I said, I'll certainly be looking out for what Bervoets is writing next. I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.